Hello. So today we're going to be looking at taxes. So taxes are a form of government intervention. Government intervention occurs when there is market failure in any specific market or a few markets all at once, and the government will intervene to correct or reduce that market failure. And this obviously happens in a socialist mixed market economies. Obviously, if you're in capitalism, then the free market corrects all market failure, and if you're in a system of communism, then there is no technical market failure because you don't have free markets in any way, shape or form. So this happens when you have free markets and then the market fails and the government will come in and correct that market failure. So taxes are a specific form of government intervention. They're a form of government intervention where it is manipulating price mechanisms, right? So it is changing the price of a good or service to kind of use that price mechanism, that signal of higher prices, to change consumption levels in the market, right? So you have the government who intervene to change the prices in the market by levying a tax, and then hopefully consumers and producers will respond and the market will adjust accordingly to that price change, right? So there are two different types of tax. We have direct and indirect tax. Direct tax we're not really going to look at so much in microeconomics. You look a little bit more actually in macroeconomics, but we don't really look very much at microeconomics. But just to kind of explain that direct tax is a tax that is paid like directly, and it can't be like shared. The burden of that tax can't be shared. We'll have a look at what that actually means in kind of next lesson. But the burden of that tax can't be shared, it can't be split. And it's paid directly by the consumer or producer, depending. So for instance, income tax, the direct tax, is paid directly by the individuals who are labour individuals in the market, human capital, on their wage, on their earnings, and I can't share that with anybody else. Like I can't share the burden of that tax. I pay it directly, so it's direct tax. Indirect taxes are what we're going to look at today and what we're going to look at over the next week in microeconomics. And they're put in place, as I said, to correct market failure. So what I want you to kind of think about is what type of market failure they might be correcting, or the government might be looking at to intervene. Why might they use taxes? What market failure might have happened? So just have a pause, have a think, write some ideas down, and then we're going to have a look at them. So some of the things that you should have got are to do with merit or like demerit goods. So there is an overconsumption through free market economics of certain goods and services, and they are overconsumed, and the price signals do not stop individuals consuming those goods or services. So what happens is the government might intervene to adjust those prices, to kind of manipulate those market mechanisms, to kind of signal to consumers to leave the market, right? And also to producers as well. So that's obviously connected with externalities, and we're going to have a look in the next video at how taxes actually affect externalities, and they change that size of the externality. When I say externality, you should automatically know that I'm talking about negative externalities. You'll kind of see why when we start looking at manipulation of the diagram, why it would make no sense to tax on a positive externality. And we're going to have a look today at two different types of indirect tax. The first type of indirect tax that we're going to have a look at is a lump sum tax. It's sometimes known as a specific tax, but basically it's just that. It's like one lump sum tax. So it doesn't matter, essentially, what quantity you are producing, the tax is exactly the same. Right? So if you are producing 10 units, 10,000 units, 1,000,000 units, the amount of tax that you are paying is exactly the same. So the first kind of big question, I guess, when it comes to taxes to think about is who or what is affected by the tax. So I'm going to talk about the impact of a specific tax on a market, and I want you, before I do it, to tell me, does it affect the demand curve, or do you think it's going to affect the supply curve, right? So Taxes, all indirect taxes affect the supply curve, right? It changes the amount that you can supply at the same price, right? So at the same market price level, because you have to pay an additional tax, it changes the amount that you can physically bring to market, right? So we'll have a look at whether or not consumers are also affected by that tax, and how they can share the burden of that tax in more detail next lesson. But for now, I just want us to think about how does it actually affect the supply curve. So what I want you to do is draw this diagram down, pause the video, have a go at what you think is going to happen with the tax, then we're going to do it together. So have a pause, off you go. So all that happens is, if you just think about it logically, 100% this will come to you. So we have a market equilibrium here, right? So under normal market mechanisms with no government intervention, this is the market price and this is the quantity that is brought to the market, right? That is cleared by the free market. So what is happening here is that you are increasing a burden on producers to enter the market. They have to pay a lump sum to be able to enter the market. Now I say they have to pay a lump sum to enter the market because it doesn't matter whether they're producing 1 unit or whether they're producing 4,000 units. So for them to just produce that 1 unit, they have to pay that lump sum tax, the exact same amount. So therefore they have to pay to kind of like enter the market, so to speak. So at the same price level previously before, you just need to ask yourself, okay, well, can they make less quantity or more quantity? And automatically we should know that they're going to be making less quantity. So because they're making less quantity, you then have to ask yourself a second question. So if they're making less, we know that the supply curve is going to move inwards, right? It's going to shift to the left. So at that point, we need to ask ourselves, what is that going to look like? Like, what is that shift going to actually look like? Well, we know for a fact that it's a lump sum tax. So we know that it's not changing the price of that tax the more or less that you produce. So therefore, the shift inwards is going to be a parallel shift, right? So we're going to go from here to here like this. So this is our new supply curve plus the tax. And because of that shift, we already know, as I've said before, that is a manipulation of market mechanisms. So therefore, we know that we're going to see an increase in the price. And because we've had an increase in the price, hopefully we're going to see a decrease in the quantity demanded in the market, right? So the government has intervened into the market, they put a lump sum tax, we see a parallel shift, and because of that parallel shift, prices have risen. Because prices have risen, the quantity demanded in the market is less. Therefore, potentially, that demerit good is going to have a lower demand and we're going to consume less of it, right? The market hasn't produced the correct level of consumption, so the tax has been introduced to kind of manipulate to the right level of consumption, hopefully. Now, the kind of like bonus question, so to speak, is to think about, well, what makes this less or more effective? We're going to have a look at it next essay, but it's definitely something that you should be thinking about right now. So what is going to make this more or less effective? Think about all the things that we've learned up until now, and that will hopefully help you. So when you're asked about a lump sum tax, key things that you need to do: shift to the left, you're going to have a shift inwards, and also it's going to be a parallel shift. Now, also, I mean, it makes complete sense if you think about if you were going to tax a good, why on earth would there be a shift to the right? If you were going to have a shift to the right, that would lower the price level, that would indicate that the supply producers in the market have become more efficient, they're able at the same price level to produce more. That makes no sense for that to happen if there's been a tax, if they've now suddenly got a burden on production, a cost burden on production. So here is our lump sum tax. So the second type of tax that we're going to have a look at today is called an Advalerian tax. An Advalerian tax is something that you're probably a little bit more used to. Advalerian just basically means of value. So the Advalerian tax is like a percentage-based tax, right? So you're taxed on the value of your goods or service, the amount that you produce, the physical price. So what I would like you to do is pause and have a go at thinking about, why would this diagram look different? Would it look different? And if it does look different, how different is it going to look? And how are you going to represent that on this diagram? Have a pause, have a go. So all of the theory-wise is exactly the same as our lump sum tax. We start off with a normal, intervented market, and we have a price and we have a quantity equilibrium. So this price and quantity equilibrium is delivered by the free market. This is just normal market mechanisms, no intervention, no manipulation. And we have a tax, an Advalerian per kind of percentage-based tax, right? So what is going to be the difference here? Well, one really think, is it going to shift in left or is it going to shift in right? Absolutely, it's going to shift into the left, but it is going to look different. If I'm producing one and it's at this price here, then a 5–10% tax is not going to be, very much compared to if I'm selling at like £100. So like if it was £1, then it might only be like 10%. At 10 pence, but whereas if it was £100, then that's £10. It's a lot more tax on there. So therefore the shift is going to look slightly different. So it's not only is it going to change the shift, it's also going to change the gradient as well, because it's a percentage base, and obviously the higher the price, the bigger the percentage. So we're going to be looking at here that it's also going to shift out and up, right? So the gradient is going to change as well. So here we have supply with our tax, and it does look different, right? It is not a parallel, it is a shift and also a gradient change as well. And we have a new price and a new quantity. Hopefully the exact same thing has happened, that actually there has been an increase in the price because it's now more expensive to produce, and therefore that has led to a quantity shift inwards. We demand less of it. And you should already be thinking about, as previously I spoke about externalities, you should be thinking about the impact on the externality of the tax. And that's definitely something we're going to be looking at in the next couple of lessons, as I said previously, but you should really be starting to connect all of these things. If you know that government intervention has happened because of market failure, they're going to be correcting that market failure automatically for your exams. When you're thinking about building up analysis paragraphs, you should be thinking about the connection between those points. There's been government failure, therefore the government has intervened into the market, therefore they've chosen to intervene using taxes to manipulate price mechanisms, which has led to a price increase, which will lead to a quantity demanded decrease, and therefore that then reduces the externality through X, Y, and Z. And you should be thinking about the different diagrams that you can bring to those points, right? So we need to be making sure that what we're learning, we're connecting to what we've learned before. So these are our two diagrams looking at different types of tax. Now you might be thinking, when in my exam do I use these different types of diagram, and how do I know which tax is assigned to which? Well, you kind of just have to know the different types of taxes. You've already done some research, you should already know a lot of the different types of taxes already, but most of the time it's pretty obvious which kind of tax diagram you will use, and if you use them confidently and you use them correctly, you might get a bit of benefit of the doubt anyway if you use the wrong one. So what I'm going to do is kind of leave you with an activity that you can have a quick go at. You're going to pause and have a go. I want you to draw the correct tax diagram for these three taxes. If you don't know what these three taxes are, then you need to research what these three taxes are. You need to tell me, are they a lump sum tax? Are they an Advalerian tax? And you need to draw the diagram to show me. You need to pause, have a go. I'm sure you'll do great. And then we're going to do it together now. So pause, have a go, all on your own. So our first one is an air passenger duty. Air passenger duty, if you think about kind of different prices of airlines, so we can always start with your original diagram first, which is exactly what I've been saying all the way through. So we're going to draw our demand and supply. Original diagram, you want to draw in the original price and quantity equilibrium, and then you're going to draw your change. So air passenger duty, what type of tax is an air passenger duty? Well, it is a lump sum tax. It doesn't matter where you're flying to, what you're doing, it is a lump sum tax. So because it is a lump sum tax, therefore it is going to be a parallel shift and a shift inwards. S plus tax, new quantity and a higher price. Right, and next one is our VAT. VAT, you all know what VAT is. I know you know what VAT is. So you should automatically, without even having to have done any research, knowing what VAT is. We have a normal diagram first that you've got to make sure that you draw, and you draw completely. You have your equilibrium in first. So we know that VAT is a percentage-based tax, it's an Advalerian tax, and therefore we should have the shifting and the change in gradient leading to a shifting in our quantity and an increase in our price plus our tax. And stamp duty, if you don't know what stamp duty was, obviously it's a kind of tax that you pay when you move house, when you buy a house, not when you move house, but when you buy a house. So once again, you're always going to start with the original diagram and the original equilibrium. And then once you've done your original equilibrium, then you can start to think about the effect. So stamp duty is a percentage-based tax. The more expensive your house is, the more you have to pay. There are lots of critiques on stamp duty. There's a lot of government intervention recently on stamp duty during the pandemic. Obviously we've seen stamp duty being paused. It's a really interesting tax to have a look at, and the effects of stamp duty, because stamp duty hasn't really changed in line with the huge increase in house prices. So at the moment there's a lot of economic criticism around stamp duty and kind of like the idea of stamp duty and equality or inequality, and kind of like society, especially like London compared to outside of London. So if you're interested, I really recommend that you have a look into stamp duty and the things that have been happening around stamp duty. But it is an Advalerian tax, so therefore we are going to see it look like this. And we're going to have an increase here and a decrease here. Now, you should also be thinking about other things that we've learned as well, and the things that you can bring to this kind of theory and the things that we've learned here. And one of the things that I really want to see you bringing in, and that you should have been thinking about, is consumer and producer surplus. So what is the effect of the tax on consumer and producer surplus? So what I want you to do is I want you to think about, go back to both of your diagrams and to think about what is the impact of the tax on consumer and producer surplus, both the Advalerian and the lump sum tax. Draw a separate diagram and have a look at what is happening with those consumer and producer surplus. Is what's happening different between the Advalerian and the lump sum tax? Is it the same? Have a go, and at the start of next lesson we're going to go over what the impact of that is. So I hope that you've learned a lot, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing your work. Have a good day, enjoy yourselves as much as you can, and I'll see you next lesson. Bye guys.